If you stand in the parking lot of Mohegan Sun Casino in southeastern Connecticut and look across the Thames River, you can see what is left of one of the most disturbing psychiatric institutions in American history. Most of the buildings are gone now. The tunnels have been filled in, the land has been scraped clean. But for 92 years, thousands of people were sent to that place. Some were sterilized against their will. Some underwent procedures that destroyed their minds. And some prompted state lawmakers to publicly debate whether mentally ill people should simply be put to death. To understand what that place was, you must go back much further than 1904. You must go all the way to 1650. That year, the Mohegan people gave a parcel of land along the east bank of the Thames River to a colonist named Jonathan Brewster. It was a gift, but it came with a condition. Brewster and his descendants would maintain a trading post on the property for the Mohegans. For more than 2 centuries, the land remained farmland and a place of trade along the Thames. Then the state of Connecticut decided it needed something else. In 1898, the city of Norwich donated that same land to the state. Connecticut had a problem. Its only psychiatric hospital, the Connecticut Hospital for the Insane in Middletown, was dangerously overcrowded. Patients were being turned away, and families had nowhere to send relatives who were severely mentally ill. The state needed a second facility, and it needed one fast. The 100 acres at Brewster's Neck, as the property was known, seemed ideal. It was remote, but accessible. The Thames River provided natural beauty and a sense of separation from the outside world. The state legislature approved the site in 1903, and construction began immediately. The Mohegans had no way of knowing what would be built on that land 250 years after they had given it away, or that it would take another century after that for it to come back to them. The Norwich State Hospital for the Insane opened in October 1904 with 95 patients and a single building. Unlike many asylums of that era, Norwich was not built on the Kirkbride plan with its massive batwing wards radiating from a central tower. Instead, it followed what was called the Cottage Plan, a newer approach that spread patients across smaller buildings arranged like a college campus. The buildings were connected by a network of underground tunnels that ran beneath the entire property, used to transport patients, food, laundry, and supplies between wards without ever stepping outside. The idea behind the Cottage Plan was that smaller buildings meant more personal care, more sunlight, more dignity, more of a chance at actually getting better. Within a decade, there were 16 buildings on the campus. By the late 1920s, there were more than 20. The hospital became its own small town. It had a theatre where patients attended dances and performances, a bakery, a chapel, bowling alleys, workshops, and a working farm where patients raised livestock as part of agricultural therapy. A power plant kept the entire campus running independently from the outside world. At its peak, the grounds sprawled across more than 900 acres. You could live your entire life at Norwich and never need anything from the town beyond its borders. That was the point. And for many patients, that is exactly what happened. But behind the dances and the farm work and the chapel services, Norwich had been doing something else from almost the very beginning. In 1909, Connecticut became the second state in America to legalize forced sterilization. The law allowed doctors at state hospitals to surgically prevent patients from having children if they were deemed to carry inherited tendencies toward insanity, feeble-mindedness, or criminal behavior. Norwich became the state's primary site for the procedure. Women underwent the removal of their ovaries. Men were given vasectomies. The decision was made by a panel of 3 surgeons who reviewed each patient's mental condition, family history, and likelihood of producing what the law called defective offspring. Between 1909 and 1963, 559 people were sterilized at Norwich State Hospital. Many of them never consented. And the Supreme Court ruling that made it all legal, Buck versus Bell from 1927, has never been overturned. It remains technically valid law in the United States today. By 1930, the patient population at Norwich had exploded to nearly 2,500. The facility that had opened with fewer than 100 people was now overflowing, and the cracks were no longer cracks. They were chasms. In 1939, a Connecticut state senator named Joseph Downs stood before the legislature and declared that conditions at Norwich State Hospital, in his words, stink to high heaven. He accused the hospital of providing inadequate food and clothing, of employing incompetent doctors, and of failing to hire enough nurses and attendants to care for the patients. The state formed the Barker Commission to investigate. What the commission found confirmed what Downs had described: too many patients, too few staff, not enough of anything. The hospital's board of trustees pushed back, suggesting the investigation was politically motivated. But the overcrowding was real, and no political defense could change what the commission had seen. If you have a family member or ancestor who spent time in a place like Norwich or in any institution like this, share their story in the comments below. These histories matter, and many of them have never been told. The investigation changed almost nothing, and then the war came, and things got worse. When the United States entered World War II, Norwich lost most of its male attendants almost overnight. The men either enlisted or took better-paying jobs in the defense industry. The hospital superintendent, Dr. William Bryan, was left with thousands of patients and almost no one to care for them. So he turned to two unusual sources. First, he began using patients themselves as ward attendants. Second, he requested conscientious objectors. 110 men arrived at Norwich from 1943 to 1946, sent by the Brethren Service Committee as part of the Civilian Public Service Program. Most were Quakers, Mennonites, or Church of the Brethren members. They were pacifists who had refused to fight in what most Americans considered the most justified war in history. Their communities treated them with suspicion. Regular hospital staff treated them with contempt. But what these men witnessed inside Norwich changed American mental health care. The conscientious objectors worked as ward attendants, mostly on the back wards, where the most severely ill and the criminally insane patients were kept. They saw things they had not been prepared for. Patients crammed into wards designed for half as many, floors slick with urine, attendants who kept order the only way they knew how, with their fists. Regular staff beat patients who did not comply quickly enough. They used wet towels twisted around patients' necks to choke them into submission, a technique that left no visible marks for inspectors to find. Violence was not considered abuse. It was considered standard procedure. The conscientious objectors refused to participate. They would not strike patients. They would not curse at them, and for that, the regular staff despised them. But the objectors did something the regular staff never had. They wrote it all down. They sent detailed reports to their church committees describing exactly what was happening on the wards. Those reports eventually helped trigger a national reckoning with the conditions inside state mental hospitals across the country. 11 of those conscientious objectors agreed to something even more disturbing than ward duty. In 1944, they volunteered as human subjects in a jaundice experiment conducted at the hospital. The following year, 4 more volunteered for a study on infectious mononucleosis. Meanwhile, one conscientious objector, who happened to be a physician, was assigned responsibility for 1,600 patients within days of arriving. His caseload eventually grew to 2,300. The reports the conscientious objectors sent back to their churches would eventually help change American mental health care. But that was years away. Inside Norwich, the procedures continued. During the 1940s, Norwich introduced electroconvulsive therapy and prefrontal lobotomies. The lobotomies were performed in the Lippitt Building, one of the hospital's original 1904 treatment facilities. It had surgical suites, hydrotherapy rooms, and X-ray equipment. Patients went in through one door. Some of them came out different. Some of them did not come out at all. The most notorious building on campus was Salmon Hall, the maximum security ward for patients judged not guilty by reason of insanity. It was one of the original 1904 buildings, and it had more in common with a prison than a hospital. Bars covered the windows. Steel doors sealed the rooms. Patients lived in cell-like spaces behind locks that only staff could open. Former employees described isolation cells with solid doors that blocked all light, where patients could be confined for days. Children were reportedly housed in the same building, separated from violent adult patients by nothing more than a few floors. Unwed mothers were sent there by families who wanted them hidden. Women considered insane were not allowed to keep their children, and in many cases the records of where those children were sent have never been found. Salmon Hall operated until 1971, when it was finally shut down. By then, it had been in continuous use for 67 years. And then there was the detail that makes Norwich unlike any other institution in this series. In 1921, a committee of Connecticut state legislators visited the hospital. They walked through the wards. They saw the overcrowding. They saw the patients who had been there for years with no prospect of release. And afterward, a column appeared in the Hartford Times under a headline that is difficult to believe was ever printed in an American newspaper. The headline read, "Should the hopelessly insane be put to death?" This was not a thought experiment. This was not an editorial by a fringe voice. Connecticut lawmakers were publicly debating whether it would be merciful to execute mentally ill people who were poor and considered beyond treatment. The patients at Norwich were not just being neglected, they were being discussed as candidates for extermination. The column ran, the debate happened, and Norwich State Hospital was the institution that prompted it. Think about that for a moment. Less than 20 years after the hospital opened with the promise of smaller buildings and better care, the state that built it was asking whether the people inside it should simply be killed. By 1955, Norwich held 3,184 patients, the most it would ever house. After that, the numbers went in only one direction. The introduction of Thorazine and other psychiatric medications in the mid-1950s meant that some patients could be stabilized enough to leave. Changing public attitudes toward institutionalization, fueled in part by the very reports those conscientious objectors had written a decade earlier, made the large state hospital increasingly difficult to defend. Federal funding began shifting toward community mental health centers. The promise was that patients would receive better care closer to home. Whether that promise was kept is another story entirely. Buildings that had been constructed to last centuries started closing one by one. The farm was shut down in the 1970s. The agricultural therapy that had once been a cornerstone of the hospital's philosophy was abandoned. Salmon Hall was closed. Ward after ward went dark. New, modern buildings had been constructed on adjacent land in the 1950s and 60s under Superintendent Ronald Kettle, who had genuinely tried to reform the hospital. But even those newer buildings could not survive the tide of de-institutionalization. By the time Norwich officially closed on October 10, 1996, only 2 of the original buildings were still in use. The remaining patients were transferred to Connecticut Valley Hospital in Middletown, the same overcrowded facility that Norwich had been built to relieve nearly a century earlier. The campus was abandoned. What followed was a slow-motion collapse that lasted longer than many of the patients had lived there. The state tried to sell the property. Nobody wanted it. In 2006, a company called Utopia Studios proposed a $1.6 billion entertainment complex on the site, complete with a theme park, 4,200 hotel rooms, a performing arts school, and a movie studio. The deal fell apart within months. In 2008, another developer proposed a $1 billion luxury resort. That collapsed with the financial crisis. The buildings sat empty. Vandals broke in, fires broke out. The underground tunnels, still lined with asbestos-wrapped pipes and rusted gurneys with restraint straps still attached, became a destination for urban explorers and ghost hunters. Television crews from the Sci-Fi Channel and VH1 filmed episodes inside the decaying wards, rebranding the hospital as a haunted attraction. Former employees were disgusted. In 2009, the state of Connecticut sold 390 acres of the Norwich State Hospital campus to the town of Preston for $1. Developers had dreamed of building billions of dollars worth of theme parks and luxury resorts on the property. None of it materialized. In the end, the land where 559 people had been sterilized against their will was worth exactly $1. The tunnels where patients had been restrained and transported between buildings they were never allowed to leave. $1. The place that had once prompted state lawmakers to publicly debate whether mentally ill people should simply be put to death. $1. Demolition began in 2011. The tunnels were collapsed first. Then Salmon Hall came down. Then the cafeteria and theater. Then the power plant, the chapel, the research center. By 2018, the roads had been stripped of asphalt and the ground was being excavated. In 2020, workers discovered buried coal ash beneath the soil, requiring additional remediation funding before any development could begin. And then, after every proposal had failed, after nearly every building had been demolished, a familiar name reappeared. In 2016, the Mohegan tribe reached an agreement with the town of Preston to develop the property. 366 years after the Mohegans had given that land to Jonathan Brewster, the tribe was taking it back. The plan is called the Preston Riverwalk. Hotels, restaurants, retail space, a marina. The land that had been a trading post, then a farm, then an asylum, then a ruin, would become something new. The Mohegan tribe has said that only one structure will be preserved, the administration building, the first building constructed on the campus in 1904, will remain standing. Everything else will be erased. If this story stayed with you, or if it reminded you of a place you have driven past without knowing its history, take a moment to share this with someone. There are thousands of places like Norwich across this country, and most of their stories have never been told. The land along the Thames River in southeastern Connecticut is quiet now. The wards are gone, the tunnels are filled, the patients are buried or scattered or forgotten. But the administration building still stands on the terrace above the river, its brick facade and arched windows watching over empty ground where 30 buildings once stood. It looks out across the water toward the lights of the casino. It was the first thing built on that ground, and for now at least it will be the last thing left.